Hello everyone, my name is Alex. I'm a 2000 rated over-the-board chess player, and in this series we're going from 1500 to 2000 elo in chess.com rapid games, where I'll be explaining my thought process as best as I possibly can for your education and entertainment. Today we face a French defense with e4, e6, and the line that I like to play is pawn to b3, the Horwitz attack. I was recently toying with the exchange and the Monte Carlo system with C4. So it's kind of like a Caro Khan Panov attack because I play the Panov against the Caro. But yeah, I wasn't really enjoying it. But okay, right. My opponent has transposed into a Sicilian defense with pawn to C5, which is interesting. So I'm going to go bishop B2. I'm expecting the move D5, and I don't think I'm going to take. Or am I going to take? No, I think I'm going to push E5 if he plays D5, but he delays D5. Okay, this is interesting because this is just not an not a real opening, I suppose. He does have to play D5 at some point, really. But okay, how should we continue our development? Well, personally, I really like the move F4 because on d5, I really want to go e5, and then the f pawn just lends really good support to the e pawn. So that's what I'm going to play. E5, we're also stopping that, I suppose, although realistically, he's not going to play e5 anyway. Knight to f6, we can just go ahead and kick the knight, I think. Although then maybe the knight moves, and then d6 breaks apart my e pawn. Although I do have knight f3, and the pawn is very well defended. Interesting, though. Interesting. I think d5 is the move that makes the most sense. I mean, it has done for the past several moves to, play a French defense. But my opponent really doesn't seem to want to play it, which makes me think that he's very uncomfortable with the opening that I've played, and he wants to try to avoid the main line, which I assume he knows is going to be d5. Um, just taking space in the center. I mean, that's the whole point of playing e6. So I think he's trying to avoid the main line because he doesn't want to get involved in any theory, which is smart. It is a smart move. And he does go d5 eventually. And yeah, we're going to play pawn to e5. If on move 2, instead of c5, d5 is played, then we play bishop b2 and we are happy to gambit the pawn. And then there's a whole lot of other things that happen. The game is completely different. If you want to see what does happen there, I have a playlist linked below with all of my games on the channel in the B3 French defense. But okay, we have d4. My opponent takes some more space in the center. We could go c3 immediately, challenging the pawn. Can d3 be played there? Well, no. Then we just go queen to f3 and we win the pawn. But if c3, I mean, he can just leave the pawn there. He doesn't have to do anything with it. So I think it makes more sense to start with knight to f3, applying more pressure and preparing the move pawn to c3. Also, moves like bishop to b5 could be useful, trying to pin the knight so that it doesn't help in the defense. Although, uh, Black's light squared bishop would probably be very happy to come to d7 if we play bishop to b5 and break the pin. Because, I mean, his light squared bishop sucks. It doesn't really have anywhere to go because, it's a French bishop. It's stuck behind the e pawn. And yeah, I mean, there's lots of different ways we can play this. I think we probably go bishop b5 regardless. We could just go bishop e2 and get castled, but it feels a little bit passive. And I also do want to play c3. I think that that is an important move to make because we need to try to give this bishop a little bit of scope. And just by playing these structures over and over again, I've come to realize through analysis of my own games that the engine always hates when I don't try to challenge this pawn. Now, not necessarily immediately. I don't necessarily have to go for it straight away, but I can't just leave it. I can't play a move like d3, for example. The engine hates the move d3. if it means that I can't play pawn to c3. Like, I really just need to get it done at some point. But okay, my opponent goes knight g to e7, just continuing his development. Maybe he can make use of f5 or d5. One of the other reasons that d3 isn't a very good move in these positions is because it weakens the e3 square, which is clearly exploitable. So I'm very tempted to play c3. Yeah, if d3 is played, we can't immediately win the pawn, but we can play a move like knight a3, preparing queen b1, and I don't see how black defends the pawn a second time. So let's go c3. If black takes, then we should be very happy. I think we can go ahead and take with the knight. We have ideas of knight to b5, maybe going after d6. We have pawn to d4 on the cards. It's all very good. Taking with the d-pawn doesn't make that much sense to me, because I think we should be trying to get rid of this c-pawn by playing d4 ourselves if this trade does happen. And also, our knight has a lovely looking square on e4 that it could go to at any point. This bishop can still come out to b5. It looks very, very nice. By the way, if you're enjoying this video so far and you haven't already, please drop a like and subscribe. I would really, really appreciate it. And yeah, we will continue the game, see how my opponent handles this. One of the good things about playing offbeat lines, such as the b3 French, is that, your opponents aren't really going to know what's going on a lot of the time. They might not be as familiar with the themes of the opening. I mean, knight g6, I'm not particularly impressed with, because, we just go pawn g3. And now this knight has no way of playing a role in the game. I thought it was far more effective on f5 or d5, because now we have the classic structure where the pawn is two squares, like, below the knight, almost, like, vertically, and controls its forward movement. And furthermore, we have a pawn on f4, which is stopping it from coming to e5. So the knight can literally just return back to e7. So I don't really know why my opponent's done that. I'm not concerned about this diagonal, because of course g3 does weaken this diagonal, right? However, the knight is currently defended, and if a move like queen d5, which I'm not really concerned about, worst case, I could just play bishop g2 and castle, and then my bishop's defended, and then, I don't know, I have some kind of discovery if I want it. So, yeah, I'm really not concerned about this diagonal being weak. Maybe my opponent can try pawn to b6, trying to get his bishop on the long diagonal. But if pawn b6, bishop g2, bishop b7, I can probably even just take on d4, and I probably have tactics against my opponent's bishop. If not, I could just castle, and worst case scenario, the bishops get traded sometime in the future. So again, not really concerned at all. So yeah, we have a distinct space advantage, I think. Yes, you could say that my opponent has a pawn on d4 and we have a pawn on e5, which is exactly the same. And in a sense, it is. But I would say our pawn on e5 is far more secure than my opponent's pawn on d4, because we're going after the pawn. My opponent, I don't think, is going to play pawn to f6, trying to go after ours. Okay, he goes pawn d3, wedging the pawn in place. I thought we could just go knight a3, queen b1, though. We also have future ideas of h4, h5 going after this knight, particularly if the bishop comes to e7 and the knight loses access. But we don't want to rush and let our opponent play knight to e7 prompted, right? We don't want to prompt him to do that, because that gives him extra time. So, yeah, I think just knight a3 looks pretty strong. The knight can come to c4, the knight can go to b5, gets the knight out of the way so our queen can go after the d3 pawn. Yes, I ideally want to put my bishop on the g2 square, but I also want to win the d3 pawn. It also wouldn't be ridiculous to play a move like king f2, defending the knight. So let's say, I don't know, a move like queen d5. Putting pressure on the knight, now I can't go queen b1, because then I'll lose the knight, right? It genuinely looks like a decent idea. on queen d5 to just play king f2 and say, okay, my knight's now defended. Now queen b1 is a threat, and I don't see how you're going to stop that. You can't really exploit me on this diagonal unless you want to sack a pawn, I guess, to gain access to c5. But even then, I'm not really concerned. Okay, he goes pawn a6, which I don't understand how that deals with queen b1. So I'm just going to play it, I think. And now queen d5 doesn't do anything because I can take and the knight's defended. And we're offering a queen trade. a6 is a very slow move. So let's go queen b1. I'm not seeing how black is going to defend his d-pawn. He just isn't. Okay, awesome. Well, that's a free pawn for us. Our knight can now come to c2 to come back into the game. And this is kind of like a structure with the knight coming to a3 and into c2, with the pawn going to c3, that you will recognize if you've watched some of my games that I've played previously in the b3 French, if you've got really good memory. It's a very common idea because often you want the pawn on c3 and not the knight. Okay, my opponent goes bishop to b7. I think we should just go for the queen trade without thinking too hard about it. We're up a pawn. No need to deliberate too much, I don't think. And I also don't think we should deliberate too much over bishop to g2. The knight needs to be defended. And we also probably want to get castled, or even just play a move like king e2, connecting the rooks, so that we keep a better eye on d2. And clearly d4 is the move that we want to play at an opportune moment, because, well, I mean, we want to open files, probably. Although, you know, for the time being, maybe there's issues with my bishop being overworked, so it might be better to play knight to c2 first. One of the good things about this position is that, yes, my king is in the center, but black has no open lines against my king. Partially, there's no queens on the board, which just makes the position safer in general. But also, we have all of our pawns. We haven't traded any pawns. My opponent has obviously lost a pawn, so yes, he has the open d-file, but he can't really do a whole lot with that. Okay, knight to a5. All right, well, that opens this up. I get that. Beyond that, what does it do? Well, the knight kind of sucks for a start. So that's good. No, I don't want to do this, because then my pawn structure gets ruined. If I castle, then he's going to take and then take. So I'm thinking just king e2. Just adding another layer of protection to the knight, keeping an eye on d2. Yeah, the bishop is undefended still, so the knight is pinned to the bishop. I haven't solved that problem yet. But I think I just want to play a move like rook f1. Arguably, I could have done that already. Or maybe rook g1. Just defending the bishop. In fact, I even just like knight c2, bringing the knight back. Knight e1's pretty good as well. Oh, I quite like knight e1. Just trying to force the bishop trade, but without having to go through the hassle of having our pawns doubled. So yeah, this is actually what I'm going to do. And I mean, if he puts the knight on c6, for example, trying to get some kind of repetition, then I probably will play bishop e4. Oh, and no, then I fall to this. Yeah, no, that's no good. Knight c6. How can I deal with that? Well, I could just start with knight a to c2, preparing d4. d4 isn't going anywhere. I'm technically in no rush to play it. I also don't want to take the knight on c6, because then my opponent gets the bishop pair, and his bishop's pretty nice on this long diagonal. And, you know, there's no reason to give that kind of imbalance when I'm just up a clean pawn. So my opponent allows the trade, which of course we will happily go for. And then I'm just bringing the knight back to f3 to prepare the move d4. I'll probably also drop this knight back to c2 to add even more protection, and just ensure that it isn't in the bishop's line of fire. Again, I don't think we have to rush too much about this position. We can take it relatively slowly, open up a D or C file to get our rooks involved. Also, as I mentioned previously, this knight absolutely sucks. It just can't get involved in the game. Yeah, let's drop the knight back to C2. I just want to go D4, but like I said, I don't want my knight to be vulnerable. Also, maybe bishop A3 could force a trade. My opponent doubles up. Let's play D4. Protected 1, 2, 3, and 4 times. So, I mean, I said ages ago, D4 is the move that we're going to play eventually. And if a trade occurs, then we will switch our focus to the C file, because then that will be the open file. And yes, my opponent has a semi-open file against the D pawn, which technically is a backwards pawn. But, I mean, we can just defend it with all our minor pieces, which we're currently doing, and it's unclear how black is ever going to win the pawn. We could even bring our king up to help in the defense, and in the meantime, we can shift our focus over to the C file. This is kind of a position where we have no real weaknesses. We have this very strong pawn pyramid, and we have these pawns on A2 and B3, which there's no way to go after the A pawn, really. So the B pawn is protected by the A pawn. The A pawn you can't really go after, so that's very secure. Like I said, the only real weakness is our D pawn, but it's less of a weakness on D4 than it is on D2. I mean, 1 on D4 is controlling C5, which is clearly a good square to be controlling, because a lot of the black pieces would love to go to D5, to C5, sorry. Also, this knight sucks because it can't get involved in the game properly. It can't come to D6, it can't come to C5. If it goes to A5, then, I mean, it can't come forwards. So the best way for this knight to get involved is probably via A5 and into C6, trying to target some of the dark squares. But even then, my knight on C2 is monitoring those squares very nicely. So, yeah, we're just going to play very solid chess, essentially, and not really do anything overly special. Because, I don't know, a lot of chess, you don't have to do anything incredibly special. You can just make good moves, and you'll get rewarded for it, most likely. My opponent goes H5, I mean, we can probably just go H4. Why overcomplicate things? This is a weakness at the end of the day. Yeah, maybe G3 is a weakness, I suppose. I don't know. I'm just not too concerned, to be honest. I think we can whack a knight on G5 if we really want to. Maybe black can try and bring his knight into F5 to target G3. That would be a viable option. But, that is also a very slow plan. I know we can take on C5, but I'd rather not, to be honest. I'd rather my opponent take me, because if I take on C5, then my C pawn is kind of bad, and I'm also giving my opponent the C5 square, which, like I said, is kind of like a square that a lot of his pieces want to use, particularly this knight. This knight could get very involved in the game. Also, I don't want to open up the D file for his rook, because then I just allow potential infiltrations. So my opponent goes knight to A5, as expected, trying to come into C6, I assume. I think rook to D1 makes the most sense, preparing to try to trade all the rooks, which should mean that it's a bit of a smoother endgame. So I guess rook A to D1. If rook A D1, then maybe my opponent takes. So what about if we instead play pawn C5, bishop C5, now that the knight can't take? Oh, we just have pawn 2 B4, forking. Although, no, there's knight to C4 going after the bishop. So that doesn't quite work. So, okay, what if we play take and rook to D1? Which forces rook trades. I think I kind of like that. Especially because the knight isn't on C5. That's the important part for me. Yeah, let's do it. Let's do it. As I said, I would love to play the move pawn b4, but unfortunately there's knight c4. We could try and set that up with a move like knight to e3, like, in this position, maybe knight to e3 is better, because you're like, well, now this is a threat because there's no knight c4 because I just take you. Which is true, although the bishop can always take the knight at any point, so, you know, it doesn't really work. But yeah, I know I'm violating what I previously said of, oh, I don't actually want to take on c5 because the black pieces can use the c5 square. But that was contingent on the knight being able to take, because the knight could actually utilize the c5 square quite nicely to particularly come into e4 and cause a bit of trouble, because I wouldn't have king to f2 there because the knight would control that square. But the knight is on a5 now, and knights on the rim are dim, of course, and he has to take. I mean, he can't afford to give me a second pawn, really. If I go b4, you can go knight to c4, as in if he doesn't take, and I can play bishop c1, and you can maybe try and come into d3, but I don't think that's enough counterplay. I don't know. Maybe it is. Can I defend c3 properly? I don't have bishop to d2 because my opponent controls that with the knight. Ooh, no, 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 no. That can't be the move. That can't be the move. No, 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 no. No. No, then I just go b4. And if a5, I just have a3. I can play rook a to d1. I can play the knight into d4. Yeah, this doesn't work. In fact, I don't even have to play a3 because my knight's controlling that square. So I can just play rook a to d1. Yeah, now we're up 2 pawns. We're facilitating a lot of trades. This knight can't access the position because we have such good dark square control. The issue for black is that both his knights are on light squares. And of course, knights go to the opposite square color every move, right? So neither of these knights can actually do anything. Like, they literally can't do anything, either of them. You can't use the a file either because I'll just go pawn to a3, and my knight is doing a beautiful job of defending everything, as well as my bishop, as well as this knight. We just went up a pawn, effectively, solidified the position, won a second pawn, and now we're just facilitating trades and trying to cut out any potential counterplay that my opponent can create. Furthermore, we're just going to go a3. I mean, we're going to hopefully trade all the rooks as well, which would be great. But we're preparing to just play a3, knight d4, and after the knight trade, you just can't defend b5. So black might be forced to, after a3 and knight to d4, play a move like knight to a7 to defend. But then I mean c6, and the game is as good as over. So, yeah, this is pretty nice. And hopefully this will be a very good lesson in endgame conversion. This is... Sorry about that. Obviously, we have only traded 2 sets of pieces. A set of bishops and the queens. But this is really an endgame at this point. You could say it's a late middle game, except there are trades that are going to happen, and that's kind of inevitable. And also, the black pieces just aren't really doing anything. And this game is just going to come down to the fact that I have a 3-on-1 on the queen side, and black simply can't generate enough counterplay on the king side. He could maybe try a move like f6 to break apart my structure, which is probably a good idea to generate some form of counterplay. The issue is, though, this is very well defended, so f6 doesn't even do anything. So, okay, let's trade. I assume my opponent's trying to play knight to e7, which makes sense, to try and get into the light squares. I don't think it works that well, though, because I'm just going to go knight here. Well, this knight here, actually. And I'm controlling f5, so you can't access my g3 pawn. And I'm also targeting your b5 pawn, and I'm offering you a knight trade. And the black bishop just can't do anything in this whole thing. Like, while all of this is going on with the knights, the black bishop can't get involved whatsoever, basically. Okay, he goes after b4. We can just defend b4. I see no reason. We could push. And if take we push, and you actually can't stop the promotion. Although, no, then the bishop can take. Let's not blunder now. Let's just play pawn to a3. And you can give a check and go to c4, I suppose. But I'm just going to go bishop c1 in response to that. And then the knight's movement is fully dominated by our bishop. Which means that the knight can't really cause any more chaos, and you're still losing your b5 pawn at the end of the day. There's no good way to defend it. There's no good way. The only way to do it would have been to play knight c7. Which, I don't know, maybe black can try and fight on after knight c7, but we're still up 2 pawns, and black is very passive. He's trying to play actively, which of course makes sense. He's trying to create some kind of counterplay. But now with this structure, with the bishop and the knight 2 squares away from each other like this, the knight's movement is fully dominated by my bishop. The knight's backward movement is also dominated by my pawns. So my opponent resigns because I'm just going to pick up the b5 pawn. I'm going to play into d3, and then you're going to lose the knight. The knight's just trapped in the center of the board because we dominate the dark squares and the knight is on a light square. So yeah, the position comes to its logical conclusion, essentially. Good game to my opponent. Hope you guys enjoyed and learned a lot. I really do love this French system, by the way. I hope it can inspire some of you to try it for yourselves. But let's jump into the analysis and see what the computer has to say. Okay, so a lot of you don't watch the analysis portion, and if you're about to click off this video, shame on you, because this is where the real learning happens, and the people who do stick around, they know that. So 89.8% accuracy for us, 81.5% for my opponent. Let's jump into it. So e4, e6, and b3, which is known as the Horwitz attack. Like I said, I have a whole playlist on my channel dedicated to this system. By the way, I have glasses now. I finally got glasses that are the same as my actual prescription. So, yeah. Anyway, no one cares. So the whole point of this is to meet d5 with bishop d2, bishop b2, sorry, and allow d takes e4, and you're going to win the pawn back. There's very little that black can do about that. I actually played this system against a FIDE master a few months ago in an over-the-board game, and I got a winning position, and I messed it up because I got into time trouble. But the opening works, and that's what is important. But my opponent goes c5, transposing into a Sicilian. I continue with bishop to b2, knight to c6, and f4. Now, the computer doesn't like f4 because it prefers boring chess, and I think it just wants to take... Oh, no. Wait, what? Oh, that's actually not boring chess. I take it back. That's actually very fun and interesting chess. But what if black just does something like bishop d7? e5, e5? Apparently this is good for us. Anyway, I went f4 because I like f4. Because I like e5, and I like the f-pawn defending e5. So d5, e5. Computer hates me for playing e5. It wants me to play knight f3, and if my opponent takes, it wants knight e5, and if my opponent takes, it wants fe5, and if bishop d7, it wants knight c3 and bishop c6, and queen e2, and queen d4, and then knight d1, which is, of course, the most natural move in the world, and then putting the knight on f2, because why would you not put the knight on f2? Of course. However, I played e5, because I like these locked center structures. My opponent went d4, which is a mistake. Computer hates it. It wants my opponent to just develop normally. Play knight to h6. Bishop e2. Let's say knight f5. Then bishop d3. Okay, yeah, sure. No, realistically, I'd castle here. And yeah, this is kind of like a French. I mean, it is a French, like an advanced French almost, but a good version of it for black. My opponent went d4, taking space. We went knight to f3. My opponent went knight g to e7, just developing, and we go c3, going after the pawn immediately. Now, my opponent here played knight g6, which I just thought was a horrific move the moment I saw it. The engine agrees. We just go g3, and I mean, this knight just doesn't do anything. In fact, The third favorite move of the computer is to bring the knight back. It's not good. Now, I could not fathom why knight to d5 wasn't played, because I thought that was incredibly logical. Applying pressure to f4, taking a bit of space. I probably still have to go g3 to defend, except now your knight is a really good piece. But knight g6 was played. I go g3. My opponent goes d3, which is very, very weird move. Computer likes f6, which, yeah, makes sense once you see it. Alternatively, b6, I thought my opponent might play this. And I was just going to go bishop g2, bishop b7 in castle. That was my plan. And it's slightly better for white, which I was, more than happy with. My opponent went d3, though, and we played knight a3, which is the only move to get an advantage, because we're going after this pawn. Here, as I was saying, queen d5 would be a crafty move, stopping queen b1, because then you would lose your knight. And here, I said that it wouldn't be ridiculous to play king f2, and it's the computer's second favorite move, after bishop g2, which it is its favorite move. And then the computer thinks that rook b8 or queen d7 should be played, which are, of course, the moves that we were all thinking, right? That's just what our brains immediately went to. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe queen d8 looks more natural to me. Although, this pawn is more of a liability than anything else, because you just can't support it. It just can't be supported. So a6 was played, and then the only good move here is queen b1, because now you can't defend the pawn. b5, we of course take. My opponent goes bishop b7. I am more than happy with a queen trade, and then I just try to play solid chess. I'm like, look, I'm up a pawn. I'm going to play d4, but I'm in no rush to play d4. I'm going to get all my ducks in a row, and then we're going to play d4. We're going to open up some lines. We're going to trade some pieces. And that's exactly what happened. So knight a5, not a very impressive move because it doesn't do anything apart from opening up the bishop, which can be dealt with quite easily. King e2, bishop e7. Knight e1, the computer doesn't love. It thinks my opponent can take. And then play f6. And, right, so I don't have d4. That's the point. Because cd4, cd4, you can take and then take. My bishop is overloaded because the knight is not contributing to the defense. So does it want knight c2 first? Yes, it wants knight c2. And then, if a move like f6, d4. Right, and if my opponent plays a move like h5 and wastes a move, let's say, then knight e1 would be better? Yeah. Because now if f6, then we have d4. And we don't have to take. The issue is, if f6... no, sorry. If bishop takes g2, knight takes g2, f6, I would probably have to take. And then black kind of gets some counterplay, although the pawn is incredibly weak. So I'm not sure how easy this would be to play for black, but it would have been a good try. My opponent castles, though. I, of course, take, knight takes, and knight back to f3, preparing d4. We are in no rush. Rook d7, knight c2, rook fd8, d4. Just getting everything in order so that we can play it. h5 is a good move. I played h4, which the computer doesn't love. The computer actually just wants me to ignore this and play knight e3, and if h4, it wants me to continue ignoring it. And then let's say my opponent, I don't know, plays a move. I guess the point is that black can't move. Let's say bishop f8. Oh, yeah, black just doesn't have any moves. f6, rook 81, he just can't do anything. Huh. And we're also monitoring the knight with the knight on e3. So that's quite nice, actually. But I played h4. Knight to a5 is the best move, apparently, but I take on c5, which is a mistake. Really? Computer just wants rook hd1, which I considered, but I thought that we were wasting time. Knight back. Now dc5. Okay, what's wrong with dc5 then? So, the line for black is bishop takes. And here, I think I was just going to bring the rook over. Why is that not good? Oh, is the bishop f2? Yeah, there's bishop f2. And this is equal. Okay, well, what if I just don't bring the rook then? Well, that's fine. I could just play a move like bishop c1. And we're still winning. So, calling dc5 a mistake is maybe a bit of an overreaction from the engine. But it probably does give my opponent some unnecessary counterplay. However, my opponent went knight c6, which is just a horrific move, because now we're up 2 pawns, and there's nothing he can do about it. a5, I just go rook a to d1. I mean, there's nothing left to do. Take, bishop f8. Okay, thank you. I trade all the rooks. My opponent goes knight g to e7. We have this very nice move, knight f to d4, forcing a knight trade. And after knight d5, we can just defend. And the knight has no good way into the position. The best move here is knight c7, defending b5 and blockading the pawn. The issue is, though, black has nothing. And I'm just going to bring my king to b3, and I'm going to play a4, and I'm just going to have 2 connected passed pawns and win the game. So anyway, my opponent gives a check. We move the king. The knight either goes back to d5 and admits that it's wasted its time, or it goes to c4, and my opponent resigns after bishop c1 because he can't do anything. The computer's recommendation is bishop e7, knight takes b5, bishop d8, king d3, and then just sacking the knight for a pawn. I mean, you know, black is completely lost, no matter which way you look at it. So yeah, my opponent knows this, and after bishop c1, he resigns. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Hopefully you learned a lot, if not just like the opening, but like middle games in general. Because I guess this game was very middle game heavy, like late middle game, queenless middle game sort of strategy. And, you know, just converting a position, a pawn up, keeping things nice and simple. So, yeah, if you want to see a slightly more exciting game where we play the b3 French, check out the video up here. And if you want to see the previous episodes of the speedrun, check out the playlist down there. Thank you very much for watching. I really do appreciate your continued support, especially those of you watching to the end. And I'll see you in the next video.